I was 65 years old when I saw my whole life burn away. That morning felt normal like any other day. The sun was warm through the kitchen window. I made coffee and hummed an old song. Everything felt calm and peaceful, but then I smelled something strange. It was sharp and hot like burning wires. I walked to the living room and saw smoke everywhere. Fire was climbing up the curtains. I froze for a second. Then fear hit me hard. The smoke alarm did not ring. The battery was dead. I ran coughing and crying, trying to find my phone. The heat was too strong. I could not think. I grabbed my purse and ran to the back door. Before I left, I looked at the picture of Robert, my husband. His smile was fading behind the flames. Outside, the air was cold. My neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, came running. She covered me with a blanket and held me close. We watched my house burn to the ground, 40 years of memories gone in 1 hour. When the fire trucks came, it was already too late. The house fell down piece by piece. That night I slept on my neighbor's couch. I could not stop seeing the fire in my mind. In the morning, I stood in front of what was left, just ashes and smoke. The insurance man came and said total loss. He talked about money, but all I could think about was my life. Later, I called my son David. I told him the house was gone. He said, "Come here, Mum, we will figure it out." His words felt like a small light in the dark. The taxi ride to my son's house felt long and empty. I looked out of the window and everything seemed strange. He lived in a clean and quiet area with big houses and shiny cars. When I reached his home, I felt nervous. The house looked perfect like a picture, but it felt cold. David opened the door and looked at me quietly. Behind him stood a young woman, his wife Victoria. She smiled politely and said, "Welcome, Grace." Her smile did not reach her eyes. Inside the house, everything was clean and shining. No smell of food, no sound of life. David asked me to sit down. I sat on the couch, afraid to touch anything. Victoria brought me tea, but I wanted coffee. I thanked her and drank it slowly. They talked about rearranging rooms and schedules. I understood that I was only a guest. That night I could not sleep. I heard them laughing together in the next room. In the morning they left for work. I sat alone, staring at their perfect photos on the wall. There was not one picture of me. I unpacked my small bag and put Robert's burnt photo on the table. When David came home, he asked, "How was your day, Mum?" I said, "Fine, dear." He looked tired and distant. He said, "Maybe when the insurance comes, you can find your own small place." I smiled and said, "Yes, dear." That night I whispered to Robert, asking, "What should I do now?" The next few days passed slowly. David worked all day. Victoria stayed upstairs busy with her job. I tried to help, but she always said, "It is fine, I can do it." I cleaned the dishes and folded my blanket again and again. The silence in the house felt heavy. I missed laughter and the sound of life. One evening I cooked chicken stew. It smelled like home again. David came in and smiled. He said, "Wow, that smells nice." But then Victoria said, "Oh, I already ordered dinner." I said, "That is okay. Maybe we can eat it tomorrow." They ate their food watching a movie together. I ate my stew alone in the kitchen. That night, I cried quietly. Next morning, Victoria knocked on my door. She said, "Grace, we are happy you are here, but we both have busy lives. Please try to stay out of the way." I nodded and said, "Of course." I went for a walk to the park. Children were playing and the air felt alive. I missed Robert. I missed being needed. When I came home, I looked at his photo and said, "You would hate this." That night I heard David and Victoria talking. She said she cannot stay here forever. He said she is my mother. I cannot just send her away. Later I heard footsteps near my door. I pretended to be asleep. In the morning, David looked sad. He said, "Mum, maybe it would be good if you start looking for a small apartment." I smiled and said, "Yes, dear." After he left, I sat in the sun and thought, maybe perfection always costs warmth. Sunday came. The house was quiet. Victoria was cooking fast and neat. I asked if I could help. She said, "No, thank you, I have it." She told me to keep my things only in the guest room so the house stays neutral. Her words hurt, but I stayed calm. At dinner, David talked about a rental near Elm Street. He said maybe you can move there, it will be comfortable. I asked, do you want me to be comfortable or away? The air in the room changed. I told them I lost everything, not just a house, but the life inside it. I said I feel unseen. David said he was trying. I said I am tired of being small enough to fit in. Then Victoria spoke softly. She said she grew up with chaos and she needs order to feel safe. For the first time, I saw her fear, not anger, David said. When Dad died, I ran away. I did not know how to be your strength. We all sat quietly. Victoria said she will make space that feels like mine, not neutral. David said, come with me tomorrow to the place where the house stood. Next morning we went together. The land was empty and quiet. I showed him where the living room used to be and the window with lilacs. I touched the ground and whispered, thank you for holding my life. David held me close and said, let us make new rituals. He said Sunday breakfast together. I found a small black key in the dirt. It was from my old cedar chest. I kept it as a memory, not for what it opened, but for what it meant. For the first time, I felt hope. A week later, I went with David to see a small studio on Elm Street. It was tiny but full of light. I said I like it. It feels peaceful. He smiled and said, then it is perfect. We bought a small table, a bed and a radio. Victoria brought flowers for the window. That night after they left, I sat quietly. The radio played a soft song. The room was empty, but it felt safe. I thought about Robert and whispered, I made it love. Every Sunday, David came with coffee and laughter. Sometimes Victoria joined and we talked like a family. Slowly, the silence between us turned into peace. Life did not give back what it took, but it gave me another chance. I tell myself every morning the fire ended one life, but gave me another. I am Grace, and I am still finding home. Time started to move slowly after I shifted to the small studio. The mornings were soft and quiet. I would make my coffee on a small stove and sit by the window. The street outside came alive with people, cars, and voices. I did not hurry anymore. For the first time in my life, I had no one to answer to and nowhere to rush. The silence that once scared me now felt like peace. The studio was small, but it felt alive. I kept Robert's picture on the table and a green plant near the window. I talked to them every night as if they could listen. Sometimes I smiled, sometimes I cried, but it felt lighter each day. At night, the radio played old songs, and I sat with my memories. The music made the room feel warm, like someone was still here with me. One afternoon, a woman knocked on my door. Her name was Clara. She was 71 with white hair and a big laugh. She held a plate of cookies and said, I saw a new face in the building and thought you might like something sweet. I invited her inside and we talked for hours. She told me she had lost her husband 20 years ago. I told her about the fire and how empty I felt after it. She said grief is not the end. It is just love learning to live again. Her words stayed in my heart. David started calling me more often now. His voice sounded softer, less busy. He said he wanted to build a small garden and asked for my advice. I told him which flowers could live in any season and which ones needed care. He laughed and said, you still sound like home mum. Those words made my chest feel warm all evening. Victoria visited once with soup. Her smile was softer this time. We sat together on the floor and talked about work and life. She said she was learning to slow down. Before leaving, she hugged me. It was a short hug, but real, and it made me cry quietly after she left. Months started to pass quietly. I found a small rhythm again in my new life. Every morning I woke up early, made coffee and opened the window. The air smelled fresh and kind. One day, Clara told me about a community centre near the park. She said they had art and singing classes for seniors. At first I said no, but she smiled and said, Grace, come once just to see. So I went. The community centre was simple and full of kind faces. People were painting, laughing, and sharing stories. I sat near the window and tried painting for the first time in years. It felt strange but calm. Next to me sat a man named Henry. He had gentle eyes and a soft voice. He said I used to paint with my wife before she passed away. I looked at him and said, "I lost my husband too." He nodded slowly and said, "Maybe that is why we both ended up here." After that day, Henry and I started walking home together after every class. He was quiet but warm, like sunlight through clouds. Sometimes we stopped at the bakery near the corner. We shared one slice of apple pie and talked about small things. He told me about his old cabin by the lake. He said he sold it after his wife died because it felt too empty. I told him maybe one day he should go back. He smiled and said, "Maybe if someone came with me at home, I started writing letters to Robert again. Not to send anywhere, just to speak what was inside my heart. I wrote about Clara and Henry, about David and Victoria. I told him I was slowly learning to live again. I folded the letters neatly and kept them in a small box under my bed. It felt good to write, not from pain, but from peace. Every Sunday, David kept his promise. He came with coffee and a smile that reminded me of his father. We talked about the garden he was growing. He said Victoria had planted roses, and he laughed, saying they reminded him of me. Sometimes Victoria came too. She brought books and stories, and her laugh no longer sounded forced. One day she called me Mom by accident. She blushed and said, "Sorry," I told her. "No need to be sorry, it felt nice." That night I looked at Robert's photo and whispered, "I think we are finally healing." Autumn arrived softly. The trees outside turned golden and red. The air felt cool and calm, like a slow breath. One morning, Clara knocked on my door with her bright scarf around her neck. She said, "Grace, come with me tonight. There is a small gathering in the park. People will bring food and music, and we will light candles together." I smiled and said, "I will come." That evening, we walked to the park. The sun was setting behind the trees. Candles were glowing everywhere, like little stars on the ground. Someone played guitar, and people were singing quietly. I sat on a bench with Henry and watched the children run around. The music filled the air, and my heart felt light. For the first time in a long time, I felt part of something again. Not a guest, not a stranger, just another soul sitting in the warmth of others. Henry turned to me and said, "You know, Grace, you have changed. When I first met you, you looked like someone who was waiting for life to end. Now you look like someone watching life begin again." I smiled and said, "Maybe I am finally catching up with time." He nodded and said, "Maybe time was waiting for you too." His words stayed with me all night. When I returned home, the room felt softer. I looked at the small black key hanging by the window. I touched it gently and whispered, "You can rest now. Your job is done. You held my past. Now, I will hold my future." The next morning, I received a letter from the insurance company. They said the final amount had been cleared and the case was closed. I smiled and folded the paper away. The number on it did not matter anymore. The real rebuilding was not in money or walls. It was in the quiet peace that had found me again. That evening I sat by the window drinking warm tea. The street outside was glowing under soft lights. Clara waved from her balcony. Henry walked by with his dog. I waved back and felt warmth spread through me. I realized I was not alone anymore. I had lost a house, but I had found a world. Winter came quietly. Snow covered the rooftops and made the streets shine like silver. I started knitting scarves for the children in the building. Clara brought me yarn of many colors. She said, "Grace, we will make the world warm one thread at a time." Her laugh filled my small room with life. Henry came often to help me hang small lights around the window. Every night those lights made the street below glow softly. People walking by would stop and smile. It felt good to give a little light back to the world. One afternoon, David and Victoria visited. They looked happy and nervous at the same time. David took my hands and said, "Mom, we have news. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, I could not speak. My heart filled so quickly it almost hurt. I cried softly and smiled. At the same time, I said, "Life always finds a way to begin again." They said if it is a girl, we want to name her Lily. I felt my mother's name bloom inside my chest. I hugged them both and said, "She will bring sunshine with her." After they left, I sat for a long time by the window. The snow kept falling, but I felt warm. I looked at Robert's photo and whispered, "We are going to be grandparents." I could almost hear him laugh. The months that followed were full of small joys. I made a soft white blanket for the baby. Henry built a tiny wooden cradle and painted it white. Clara helped me make paper flowers to hang above it. Every person around me had become part of my family now. Sometimes at night I sat alone thinking about the fire and the silence that came after it. And I realized maybe the fire had not destroyed me. Maybe it had cleared a path for everything that was meant to arrive. One morning I walked to the park. The snow was melting slowly, children were playing, and the air was full of laughter. I stood there watching them and thought about the life growing inside my son's home. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you to the sky. Thank you for letting me stay long enough to see hope again." The day Lily was born, the sky was bright and full of sunlight. David called me, his voice full of joy and wonder. He said, "Mom, she is here, she is beautiful." I felt tears running down my face before I could even speak. I went to the hospital with my hands shaking and my heart racing. When I held her, she was so small and warm like a heartbeat in my hands. She opened her eyes for a second, and I saw both David and Robert in them. I whispered, "Welcome home." Little one days turned into weeks, and I visited often. The house that once felt cold was now full of sound, laughter, soft cries, music, and life. Victoria looked tired but happy. Sometimes she fell asleep on the couch, holding Lily close. David would walk in with coffee and smile. He said, "The house feels alive again, Mom." I smiled back and said, "Maybe love came back through the door." Time passed gently. Lily started to grow and laugh. Her small hands reached out for everything. Every time she smiled, the whole room felt brighter. Victoria would say, "She looks at you the most, Grace." Maybe she knows who her light came from. Those words filled me with peace. On Lily's first birthday, the apartment was full of people. Clara and Henry came with gifts and laughter. There were balloons, music, and the smell of cake. I held Lily near the window as she tried to catch the floating balloons. Her tiny fingers reached up, and her giggle filled the room. In that moment, I felt something I had missed for years. Belonging that night after everyone left, I sat quietly near the window. The lights were off, but the stars were shining outside. I took the small black key from my table and held it in my hand. I thought about everything: the fire, the loss, the loneliness, the healing, and the love. I placed the key beside Robert's picture. I whispered, "Thank you for everything, for ending what had to end, so I could begin again." Now each morning I open my window and breathe the air of a new day. The world is not perfect, but it is still beautiful. My heart is full, my home is small but full of life. I am Grace, I am 65 years old, and I am still learning how to live. The fire took everything, but it also gave me myself.